The desert at dawn is a lonely hymn, soft and golden, stretching across mesas like a prayer whispered to no one. Dust carried on the wind drifts like smoke from some ancient fire, and the silence between cactus and stone feels heavy with memory. They say a man's life is not chosen by him alone, but by the land he walks and the people fate throws into his path. This is how a poor rancher, forgotten by his town, found himself bound to two sisters whose eyes told stories older than the mountains. Caleb Rowe was a man of little renown, and what little he had was spoken of with pity or contempt. His ranch had once been a promise, cattle roaming under wide skies. A wife's laughter carried across the porch. Now it was dust, debts, and a single horse tied to a fence post that leaned like an old drunk. In town, they muttered when he walked past, calling him a dreamer who'd failed, a man who had squandered the soil he claimed. He bore the weight of those whispers in silence, shoulders stooped, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. Loneliness hung about him like the dust of the trail, never shaken free. It was on a morning thick with heat and cicada song that he rode near the canyon trail, the sky bruising with storm clouds to the west. That was when he heard the cry, sharp, sudden, not human, but close enough to rattle the marrow of his bones. He spurred his horse forward, heart thrumming, and there they were. Two young women, their dresses torn from running, their eyes wide with terror. Behind them, a cougar sprang from the shadows, a blur of muscle and hunger. Caleb did not think, for thinking was a luxury. His body moved with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. He slid from his saddle, the knife in his hand flashing once before the beast struck. Its claws tore into his arm, hot fire slicing skin, but he did not fall. He met its fury with his own, slamming steel into flesh, the sound raw, terrible. Dust rose around them, blinding, and the sisters screamed, though their voices seemed far away. When it was over, Caleb was on his knees, chest heaving, blood dripping from his sleeve. The cougar sprawled lifeless at his boots. His vision swam, the edges of the world bending, yet he stayed upright. He felt their eyes on him, one pair steady, dignified, the other wide and trembling like a bird caught in a storm. Ayanna, the elder, carried her silence with regal stillness. Nalin, younger, dared to step closer, her hands shaking as she lifted a water gourd to his lips. He tasted the coolness of that gift as though it were grace itself. His words caught in his throat, but gratitude shone in his weary eyes. And then, the smallest thing happened. Nalin brushed the dust from his torn sleeve, her fingers lingering just long enough to remind him that he was still a man, not a ghost walking the desert. That touch, quiet and unspoken, struck deeper than the cougar's claws. But grace is never free in a land built on division. Word of the encounter traveled faster than a desert storm. In the saloon, voices hissed behind whiskey glasses. Caleb meddling with Apache women. Men laughed, cruel and sharp, mocking his poverty and his newfound entanglement. He felt their stares like thorns, but worse was the silence when he turned his head, the way no one would meet his gaze. In the sisters' camp, questions rose just as sharp. Why had he intervened? What did this poor rancher seek? Some whispered that the debt was dangerous, that no outsider should hold such a thing over them. Mistrust, like wildfire, burned on both sides. Caleb stood in the middle, a man without a people, torn between ridicule and the memory of two pairs of eyes that made him feel, for the first time in years, as though he had worth. The nights grew longer, restless with doubt. Caleb walked the edges of his ruined ranch, listening to coyotes sing. He wondered if saving them had doomed him further, or if it was the only thing that had ever given him meaning. When the riders came, shadows against the moonlight, he knew the answer would no longer be his to decide. They did not knock, did not speak. They simply waited, proud and silent, until Caleb gathered his hat, his knife, and what remained of his courage. He mounted his horse and followed them into the desert, the trail lit only by the pale shimmer of stars. The air was heavy with the smell of sage, and the wind carried a promise, or perhaps a warning. Somewhere ahead lay their camp, their chief, and whatever judgment awaited him. And though Caleb's arm throbbed and his soul trembled, He felt a calmness take root, as though every step of the horse was carrying him not to his end, but to the fate he had unknowingly been walking toward all his life. The night desert is a cruel teacher. Stars sharpen the black sky into crystal, and every sound, the owl's wings, the shifting stone, feels like a warning. Caleb rode into it with the Apache riders, his breath shallow, his wounded arm burning, his heart a drum he tried to silence. He knew men had died for less than he had done, and yet a strange stillness lived inside him. It was not courage. It was the resignation of a man who has lost all but one thing, the stubborn wish that his life not end in shame. The camp revealed itself by smoke first, then by firelight licking the edges of canvas and cedar. Children peered at him, whispering, their eyes wide with mistrust. Warriors stood tall, their faces carved with lines of stone and memory. At the center sat Chief Taza, the father of Ayanna and Nalan, his gaze as unyielding as the mountain. Caleb dismounted slowly, hat in hand, blood staining his sleeve. He felt as though he stood naked in the circle of firelight, every fault and failing exposed. The chief's voice came low, measured, not cruel but unbending. Why save them? What did you hope to gain? Caleb swallowed against the dryness in his throat. His words came rough, honest. I hoped for nothing. I have nothing, but I could not ride past and watch them die. That is all. His voice cracked with the rawness of a truth that cost him no small pride. Silence stretched. The fire popped. Then Ayanna spoke, her voice calm as riverstone. He fought as if our lives were his own. She did not turn her eyes from her father's, though her hand, barely visible, tightened in the folds of her dress. Nalan stepped forward, small but unafraid, herbs crushed between her palms. She reached for Caleb's wounded arm, her touch cool, sure. That gentle act undid something in him. Shame, thick as tar, began to loosen. Chief Taza studied the rancher as if peering into marrow. Then he said, words are wind. If you are a man of honor, you will endure. He ordered Caleb to ride into the desert night, to the spring beyond the ridges, and return with water before dawn. No rest, no help, no excuse. The desert welcomed him with its familiar cruelty. Each step of his horse was a thunderclap in his bones. His wound bled, the bandage loosening, the earth shifting underfoot, yet he pressed forward. He thought of the sister's eyes, of Nalan brushing dust from his sleeve, of Ayanna's unspoken faith. He thought of how the town laughed, how failure had defined him. And in that long, dark ride, he decided that if he must break, he would break as a man who gave everything, even with nothing left. Hours passed. Stars wheeled above like silent watchers. His breath grew ragged, his vision dim, but at last he heard it, the trickle of spring water slipping over stone. He knelt, hands trembling, filled the gourd, and pressed his forehead to the earth in wordless gratitude. He knew he could die here, alone, but even that would feel like something greater than the life he had lived before. When dawn spilled over the horizon, painting the mesas in fire and gold, Caleb stumbled back into the camp. His horse lathered, his shirt torn, the gourd heavy in his hand. He did not speak, only laid the water before Chief Taza, then sank to his knees. His body shook, his lips cracked, but he met the chief's eyes without flinching. The silence held longer than the night had. Then the chief gave a single nod, a gesture small but heavier than any coin. You are no longer a stranger, he said. Nalan knelt beside Caleb, her hand sliding into his, quiet as a secret. There was no declaration, no vow, only the steady press of skin on skin, the kind of connection that takes root unseen but unshakable. Ayanna allowed the faintest smile, a flicker of acknowledgement, the kind given only to those who have been tested by fire and endured. Caleb rose from that camp not as the poor rancher mocked in saloons, but as a man who had earned dignity in the eyes of those who mattered. He rode beside the sisters as the morning stretched long, their shadows touching on the desert floor. For the first time in years, he felt that he belonged, not to land or town, but to a bond forged in risk, in grace, in silence, and if you had been there, watching him disappear into the horizon, you might have felt it too. That quiet truth the desert teaches better than any preacher or book. That a man's worth is not counted in acres or coin, not in what he owns or what the world says of him. It is found in the moments he gives himself away for another, with no promise of reward. So if you ever walk this earth feeling empty, remember the rancher who had nothing until the day he chose to give everything.